Thank you.
Okay, thanks for waiting. Just setting up the slides. Zoom is always difficult for me. Okay, so do you guys see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just waiting on the, yeah, okay. So
Perfect.
hello, yeah, can I start? Yeah.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here to hear in this session. My name is EunJung. I go by EJ, and I'm presenting with Gahyun, my colleague, former colleague. We're both former university staff who worked in South Korea. And today we'll be sharing our project findings through a duoethnographic lens. This is our first time presenting at this conference, network conference, so we're really excited to learn a lot from you and a lot from the community, and also share our stories to help strengthen support for international students. So to give us just some background of our project, Gahyun and I both previously worked as international admissions officer at a research-intensive university in South Korea. And our main responsibilities included recruiting international students, international undergraduate students particularly, and reviewing their applications. But in reality, we did actually a lot more than that in all spans of internationalization work in the university. And I held this position for about 4 years, and Gahyun for approximately about a year and a half. And the university we worked enrolls around like 10,000 students and ranks high in the global ranking. And it's important to note that our experiences come from this particular context, from working at a university where English is not, English is the medium of instruction, but yet the institution was situated in a non-English speaking national context, which is Korea in this case. And after leaving our positions to pursue PhD, Gahyun in Canada and myself in the US, we began to reflect on these shared challenges back then. And we came to realize that what we experienced was not unique to our setting, but part of a broader global pattern, especially within the internationalization efforts in non-English speaking context. So that realization led us to our collaboration in this project, and we hope this can open a candid conversation among us and motivate more staffs to share our experiences. So basic touch of the theoretical framework and the gap. For this study, we use cultural readiness for internationalization called CRI framework by Agnew and then Balcom, 2009. This framework examines how ready a university's culture is to support internationalization efforts across 3 levels: micro, meso, and macro. At the micro level, we usually focus on the individuals such as students, faculty, staffs, and like their motivations, beliefs, and how they engage with the internationalization. And the meso level focuses on the organization itself, the leadership vision, the institutional mission, and how policies and structures reflect or hinder global priorities. And then finally, the macro level looks at the external influences such as government policies or business demands and partnerships with international communities. By using this multi-level lens, we believe that CRI framework helps us to dissect and understand how institutional culture shapes internationalization. And there's a substantial body of literature on globalization and internationalization in higher education, especially in the non-English speaking national context, especially in the East Asian, like Korea, China, Japan. But we had hard time finding, there's a noticeable gap when it comes to the lived experiences of the staff themselves. It's often focusing on the students, domestic, international, or the faculty experiences and perspectives, but the staff voices are oftentimes absent in the literature. So that's why we want to address this gap. And our study centers on the voices of university staff, in this case, us. And now Gahyun will walk you through the methods and the next sections of the presentation.
Thanks, EJ. As for methodology, we take a duoethnographic approach, which seeks to find meanings in our personal stories related to internationalization at the institution. Through duoethnography, we try to co-construct our story as former admission officers. Next, please. Our personality and reflexivity are important in this study, especially because we are the former university employees in South Korea and now studying as a doctoral student in Canada and the US. To put it simply, we could speak up because we quit the job. If are still working at the university, we could not have raised our voice, we believe, because we were afraid of getting fired or retaliation of the management. So these points should be clearly addressed for our analytic reflexivity. As for the data collection and analysis, we had 7 online meetings on Zoom focusing on our struggles and challenges at work. The collected data set has been analyzed based on thematic analysis to find themes and group the stories together. Drawing on our theoretical framework and methodology, 2 overarching research questions will guide this study. First, what cultural and institutional challenges did we as international admission officers encounter? Second, how were we positioned and affected by interactions with other staff members, faculty, and students? Let me now share some preliminary findings related to research question 1. One major challenge was the institutional drive for internationalization without sufficient cultural readiness. The university placed strong emphasis on improving global rankings and accelerating internationalization, but this push often overlooked whether the institution was actually prepared for it. One striking example was on the day the QS World University's rankings were released, I was told that our university's rank had dropped, and my director blamed this on the globalization criterion, specifically the number of international students and faculty. And he directly accused our team, which was responsible for admitting international students, of not accepting enough of them. Then he ordered us to write an apology and an explanation to be submitted to the university leadership. Another key challenge we identified was the segregated structure between domestic and international student services. We noted a clear and consistent divide in how the university organized administrative and support services. Domestic and international students were treated almost as if they belonged to entirely separate systems. As a result, in some cases, staff members were reluctant to assist international students directly. Instead, they would routinely redirect them to specific units such as international admission or international office. These everyday practices reflected deeper institutional and cultural divisions, showing how the university's internal structures reinforced a separation between student populations rather than promoting integration. Now, turning to our findings for research question 2, which looks at how we as international admission officers were positioned in our interactions with other staff members, faculty, and students. First, we often had to take on informal roles beyond our job descriptions. With no clear policies in place, we ended up providing interpersonal support to international students, enacting cultural readiness on our own. Second, we faced under-recognized expertise and gendered assumptions, sometimes by some faculty members. Overall, these dynamics show how staff are left to compensate for institutional gaps in cultural readiness without proper recognition, support, or structural alignment with internationalization goals. Our final finding highlights the tension between institutional branding and student realities. During one of our conversations, EJ remarked, "To be honest, I know most students did not speak English in class and on campus when it was not really necessary." So this reflects a disconnect between the university's international image and what actually happens on campus. While the institution promotes itself as English medium and globally engaged, everyday student interactions often happen in Korean. This shows that we think internationalization was pursued more as branding than as a culturally embedded practice. For us as international admission staff, this created a difficult emotional and professional position. We were asked to promote internationalization to recruit international students, yet we constantly saw how the institutional realities fell short. This gap could lead to our frustration, self-doubt, and disillusionment in everyday work processes. So this is not just a policy issue. We think it's about the emotional labor of navigating mismatched expectations, which is central to understanding cultural readiness for internationalization. Now, EJ will take over and wrap up our presentation.
Thank you, Gahyun. So in the discussion, we want to emphasize that internationalization is not just about adding international programs or partnerships. It's about intentionally embedding global and intercultural dimensions into the core of what universities do, which is teaching, research, and service. And however, what we often observed through our finding is that universities have high ambitions for global branding, but lack the cultural structural readiness internally to support those goals. And this misalignment shows up when there's a gap between the image, like branding of the university presents, and what actually happens in daily practice. And this gap directly impacts international students. Institutions may promote themselves as a globally inclusive, but without proper internal support and systems and like this cultural readiness, especially from the staff, students themselves often encounter confusion and unmet expectations or even isolations. So it's very critical to solve this disconnect, because it doesn't just affect employees, it also shapes the experience of the very international students universities aim to attract. So as we reflect on our findings, we suggest 4 key implications for institutions seeking to engage in more ethical and sustainable internationalizations, at least within the similar institutional context background, like the university that we work for in Korea, and probably other institutions in non-English speaking contexts might face similar problems and challenges. First, universities must increase transparency in branding and student expectations. That means ensuring alignment between international marketing messages and students' lived experiences, especially when it comes to the language use, academic support, and campus culture. Over-promising and under-delivering can erode the trust between the members, among the members, and it's not really good for the institution in the long term. And second, institutions need to align their internationalization goals with their internal capacity. And what it means is that strategic planning should realistically account for staffing numbers and really understand that not every staff has the language ability. Then it really needs to have more planning on how to build this international and internal capacity inside. And third, it's essential to build inclusive and integrated student support systems. This means that breaking down silos between domestic and international services and offering multilingual, culturally sensitive support. And finally, we must recognize and reward the work of administrative and support staff who are related to internationalization of higher education. During our findings, although I believe we haven't talked much about it, we found that staffs who are related to internationalization in our context were often considered as a very marginal and peripheral, and their work was often unheard, invisible, and unrecognized. And this can be changed by institutions recognizing, like acknowledging their invisible work and invest in their training, offer more meaningful recognitions and long-term development opportunities. So this is what we believe. We want to reimagine internationalizations, at least in Korean context, non-English speaking national contexts, to listen more to the people who live it every day, who practice it every day, including the staff whose voices are too often unheard. And that's the end of our presentation. These are the references that we have taken into account, and we would love to hear your comments and questions if you have any.